somewhat limited as far as time, but are going to hang for at least one of them. I have, the grant has provided jump drives for all of the presentations. And I kind of know my style, and many of the things I haven't even been able to get to are all archived on that jump drive, and including a pretty thorough coverage of 3 of the houses that I talked about this morning that I'm not going to be talking about this afternoon, but anyway, so it's all there. This presentation, and of the series of 7 of these, is and is specifically focused on foundations. And the title of this is Your Home's Foundation Costing You Money? Moisture Control and Energy Efficiency in Basements and Crawl Spaces. There's a lot of people that have foundations, both crawl spaces and basements, that have moisture problems. If you remember just one thing from this, you got to solve the moisture problem first before you attack the energy efficiency of it. So if you've got liquid water running into your basement or your crawl space, you need to address that first. And it's a wonderful subject, and there's lots of things that can be done. And there is a foundations handbook that was first written 17 years ago, led by a group that when I was at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And one of the last activities I was involved in when I left Oak Ridge at the beginning of this year was an electronic version of it, completely revised. And it addresses moisture, radon, structural, expansive soils, everything you'd want to know about foundations. What I'm going to concentrate on are the details that are in that electronic handbook. And by electronic, it's just on the web, and it's interactive, is the details that are generally recommended. But to me, the process of this was just fascinating. 15 years ago, I had the good fortune of inviting the smartest people in this area into a room for about 2 years, meeting 3 or 4 times a year. And we argued and screamed and scratched and beat on each other, and mostly it was over the details. What should be in there and what shouldn't. And I will tell you, consultants generally want to have a lot of stuff because they're going to recommend it, and they don't want you going to hire an attorney and then suing them. And the builders, and I'm being a little bit general here, but the National Association of Home Builders would argue we want as little in there as possible, because everything you do adds 50 cents to the cost of a house that knocks out somebody that no longer can now afford a house. So we kind of worked through these really different platforms and argued what the best thing was to put into these documents 17 years ago. This December, I had a similar gathering. 2 or 3 or 4 of us were there from 17 years ago. And now we had a new group. And it was just eye-opening how some of the same issues are there, but what's in it today is so much different than what was in it 17 years ago. Our cognizance and our awareness of moisture and the problems that moisture can cause are so much elevated. And I kind of wondered, wow, this is what's evolved with our species on every subject on the planet. We think we have an understanding, and do very well in a given time. We learn, we experience, we build, and now things have evolved. And so I just thought how intriguing it was to go after intensely the same issue. And what that is when I stand in front of you, I'm going to show you kind of a consensus best set of examples on how to build and retrofit your house. So I just thought that was interesting. So let's dive in. We're going to do basements, we're going to do crawl spaces. This could be masonry block. This is symbolic of poured concrete. Turns out basements, for the most part, several years ago, used to be all a northern phenomenon. you'd come to about the Kentucky border or somewhere around there, it would be all slabs, except for crawl spaces. And crawl spaces seem to propagate wherever there was mountains, which we are here. So we would have the mixture of basements, crawl spaces, and slabs. And then it was interesting, you would do like poured concrete basements in Wisconsin. You'd cross over the border to Minnesota, it was all masonry. It tended to be real who had the skills and what was the tradition in those areas. And that's been very mixed today. But when we talk about why do we want to address this, if you will, the benefits of good foundations, you're going to create more comfortable above space. So by taking care of this, it's not only going to help your basement, it's going to help the rest of your house. Obviously, you're going to save energy and you're going to reduce your utility bills. One of the things I had available to me was real powerful computer programs, and I could take a house, and I've since validated to the nth degree these computer programs. But if you went ahead and did a good job of insulating, this is getting to be about a 12-year-old story, the walls and good windows, and then left your basement completely unaddressed, that would increase your heating bill 50%. 50%, substantial. And so a lot of people have the belief that this is benign. Benign meaning there's very little heat that's going to go from here to there. Not so. As long as this is lower temperature than I want to be here, I have a constant wicking and loss of heat. I consulted on a house that is in Chattanooga, probably 20 miles from where we're standing, and a decent builder and a smart, very rich man. I said, well, why are there no insulations on the... He goes, well, there's dirt on the other side. I go, well, why is there not insulation on that as well? You got insulation everywhere. Well, there's dirt on the other side. And so, I mean, this is... You kind of go, well, what do you know about this dirt? Well, I put hundreds of thermocouples in here, and I know what the temperatures are in the winter, and you're always losing heat. And then the other thing I've done is I put moisture probes in here. I will tell you that the relative humidity right here, I'll go to any of your houses, pretty much anywhere in the country, except possibly Arizona in the middle of the summer, I'm going to be at 100% relative humidity. Why is that important? That's important because as long as I'm at 100% relative humidity, and I don't want to be like that in this space, moisture is going to want to come this way. Always. Many, many people don't appreciate this physics. That's not an opinion, it is physics. A lot of people feel basements are dungeons, there's creepy stuff there, it's moldy, it's mildewy, I don't want to even deal with it. But you can create just as good usable space, and therefore, when the appraiser comes, I get the same $100 a square foot as I get down here. Now, I got to have egress. That is, I got to have windows if I want to get out of basements. There's a couple of issues. But there's wonderful things where they oversize window wells that you can address that. And if it's a walkout basement to the south, there is nothing better, where I get south-facing windows and then a couple on the east and west side. I can be producing enormously high-quality space. And why wouldn't that? And so, if I'm going to go looking for houses to fix and flip, I would love to find those kinds of deals where people have neglected that wonderful space with a little bit of effort. So here's where you could begin to do that. Avoidance of costly moisture, termite, and structural problems. I mean, this is when you hire an inspector, yeah, they give you all this big report. But the most important thing is you want to have them giving you, does the foundation have good bones? Is it going to fall down the minute I buy it? I mean, that is a huge issue. And so the proper addressing of the insulating and the sealing of this crawl space can minimize that. And I've said this a couple times, and we all know this. In fact, people are even arguing that climate change it alienates people. When they show that little polar bear on the ice, nobody can relate to it, but it's really our health. And there's been all these studies over and over about how unhealthy our homes are when they're not properly built. And if none of the efficiency makes any sense, generally everybody wants to be healthy. And the older you get, the healthier you want to be. And so health is very, very important. Again, the nice thing about this flash drive, we walk through all this, but there's a certain kind of logic. It's very linear on kind of thinking through what the right thing to do is. Obviously, you want to determine, and this handbook is broken up. If you got a basement, boom, forget about everything else. Go into the basement. If you got a slab, go into that. Okay, determine the use of the basement, if it has any use. Is it a crawl space? Is it heated? Is it cool? Is it unconditioned? Okay, so you may want to change from a historic use to an upgraded use, and you want to maybe make it from a true conditioned space with uniform, very good humidity control and everything else, but you got to determine what that is, because that's going to define what you're going to do. Determine the construction system. I explained to you, it could be poured concrete, could be hollow core. That's important because if it is block, I could be getting something inside there called convection. And if I only put insulation, let's just say this is a basement wall, and I say, well, this is above grade, this is below, so let me just strap some insulation this far. Heat's going to behave itself. This is the cold spot. That's so-called benign. Well, what I've done is I've set up a convective loop. So what happens is I even get more heat going out of here, and inside these blocks is convection that's sucking the heat going right around this insulation. So that's why it's important to know how that wall is constructed. And if it is masonry, is it solidly grouted to prevent that from happening? Many times it's not. Many times it doesn't have anything in it, but today when you build it structurally, every fourth one should have rebar and concrete, but again, that's not enough to stop that convection. To determine the site and climatic issues, we don't have the problems that some other parts of the country have with expansive soils, but the point I made about is there water leaking in from the high side of the house, that's important and that needs to be considered. Determine the insulation placement. Okay, so a big argument is, should I go inside or should I go outside with new construction? I would argue that if at all possible, you need to look and explore as much as your pocketbook can stand to try to get an exterior solution. It is the way to go. I'm going to keep my mass on the inside. That helps me with stable comfort. I'm going to put my condensing plane. My moisture now will condense on the outside of my house, not a little bit closer to me, being between my insulation and my block. So there's many, many reasons why the preferred solution is outside, but unfortunately, and it's mostly the pocketbook, I'm very hesitant to do that because it's expensive. And I can see it here, I can get at it easier. But there's right ways to do it, and even from the inside. But I'm going to argue that they have risks when you go to the inside, less risks when you go to the outside. Determine the amount of insulation. There is a little electronic calculator. I had one of these young guys that are so smart with computers do all this for me. So in there, you punch in your zip code. They go get your electric rate, gas rate, whatever it be today, then do the numbers and spit out for you the economics. So very, very nice, very simple to do. That is available on this website. Develop construction details. So I'm going to go through the details and some footnotes, if you will, or some specifications on those details. So, or push a button, print it out, and hand it to your contractor. This is what I want. Finalize construction documents and establish quality control inspection. And so, yeah, great. I can tell somebody, but don't forget about going back, making sure it got done right. So that's kind of the flow of this document that we're going to be talking about. And then just to make sure pictorially that we're on the same, talking the same, this is considered a deep basement. So we've got something, and generally what we have here is one side is as high as it can go, and down here is, if we're on a slope. But cartoon-wise, that we're going to call a deep basement. This is what's called a dropped or submerged crawl space. this is generally a problem. Why? Because I don't put a footer drain. Historically, builders have thought, I don't need to pay attention to this. Nobody's going to live down here anyway. Even, so what if it's a swimming pool? So what if it's molding building? Nobody's going to live there anyway. Well, I'd never do that. I would deal with drainage the same as I would here, but many of our houses, there is no footer drain. There is no provisions for drainage whatsoever when I do this. Very problematic, because if I got water coming in, there's going to be standing water, and that's not a good thing to have. So this, but it's, at least historically, these are problematic if you don't build them as if they are short basements. Not so bad here. This is where, I would look at this and I'd say, man, if you had a flat site, why don't you just do a slab? Can't beat a slab. Slab's always going to be cheaper to insulate, better. It's got some challenges as far as how to construct it properly, but that's why you will see builders, they will put a lot of gravel down here, 4, 5, 6 feet, just to build on a slab, because it's cheaper and easier to insulate when done correctly. And there is your slab. We said, if you guys are probably motivated a bit by efficiency, but many other people are motivated a little bit more so, and all of us are, by health. And radon is something we haven't heard much about as of late, and I will tell you, I've kind of followed all of that. It used to be a great big deal, but it can run into trouble. When you happen to be on that site, and this area does have some sites, it's very hard to predict before the house is built, but many times there are now ordinances that say, if you know there's a radon problem, you must expose that, and then the radon mitigation is an expense that has to be done in order for the house to transact. So, if you're going to go in and do something, you might as well pay attention to this as well. So these are various passageways for the soil to get into the space that you need to be aware of. And look at some of these. Inside walls. There's stories and measurements of connection of the crawl space to the attic. I mean, these tend to be out of sight, out of mind, and more often than not, passages that allow communication. And when I've been hired to solve a mold problem in the master bedroom, these are the kind of things that you got to look at that are not intuitive that happen. Where are we? Well, I don't think the termite really behaves himself and stops at the Tennessee line. But this is what they call a heavy pressure for termites, and we all know this. In fact, many places here have even gone to 100% pressure-treated wood, even the attic trusses, because of the damage and the issues that you brought up. And somewhere in here, it begins to fall off. But I joked in the 70s about the termites making a beeline and deep into Wisconsin. So the termites are an issue that has to be addressed as long as I'm east of the Mississippi, and just something we need to be aware of, and something we need to detail for as we select.
Jeff, have the Formosan termites made it this far?
Oh, yeah. In fact, they've been, I have a couple of friends that are urban entomologists, and that's the profession that studies roaches and stuff like that. They're great, fun people to know. At lunch, you're talking about dead body counts and things of that sort, but they are absolutely. And the Formosan termite, for those of you that don't know, they don't need the subterranean tunnels. They'll just pop down in your attic. They'll pop down in four-story buildings and start at it. So, and it kind of shows that the vulnerability of all our houses with the Formosan, but still the dominant concern, and already heavily regulated concerns, and we spend a lot on our pesticides, but have gotten better and better for us healthy-wise, but have also been less and less effective. Although the biggest thing that, and I watched the development of this, is the, somebody help me out with the term, but it was Dow Elanco that came up with the bait traps around, and this was a professor in Florida, and really a good system. It really, kind of, it's helped us in the sense that we became less of an issue, because that, independent of what you got there, that tends to be the treatment of choice that you have. And I will say that I was so immersed in this, I actually did a study of when we exterior insulated, was there indeed more vulnerability with termites than when you didn't? And the data did not substantiate that that was a problem. Yet, the Termite Association made it mandatory that there be a vision strip and to this day, there is a required vision strip. That means I put insulation, but then, let's say in a crawl space, I need a 2-inch spot where I can see these. And it's still there. But yet, my argument was people that did insulate their crawl space probably had better designs and better care in the commissioning of that house, and as a result, took care of their termite issue. Okay, so here we have that same basement and insulation on the inside. So we're going to hear the words dryability. So when stuff gets wet, and the arguments are it's not will it get wet, it's when, it needs to have a path. So when I said 15 years ago we had one solution and today the whole industry had moved, here is an example of that in spades. It used to be the belief that I could build a dam here. I could build a resistant moisture barrier, and as long as I did that, I could put whatever I heck pleased in here. That didn't work. Comes here, condenses, runs down, maybe doesn't condense here, but gets in the insulation, rots out 2x4s. So, and this is a bigger issue in Minnesota than it is here. But the idea that this needs to allow the moisture not to be trapped. So this is an example, these blue arrows, of the moisture being allowed to dry itself. And so that is an important provision that needs to be built into this in some manner. So if this gets saturated, particularly if this is the west side or the south side, this is going to be wicking a lot of moisture out that way, and I really, really like that. But things here, if I don't have, and by the way, there is this termite shield that goes through this, but if I do this, that's going to tend to push more moisture up here. If I don't have a break, what's called a hygroscopic break, then that wood, particularly if it's not pressure treated, is going to rot out. So these are the types of things that you just need to come with this awareness if you're going to go retrofitting on the inside. I could talk the entire time off any one of these details, and I have about 15 in them. So I'm just going to pop things as I go through this. Here's another example. When I have, with retrofit, this is tough. You're building a new house. This is very relevant to you. With us that have existing houses, this gets tough. Hopefully, we have somewhere what's called a footer drain. If I got anything, it's usually out here, and hopefully it goes to daylight, or I have something here that goes to a sump. Many times I don't have either, and that's a problem. And that may dictate the solution that I can do. But again, if I can't solve the moisture problem, leave it alone. You're not going to get there from here. So, but today's evolution of the drainage properties is that I do not want to connect my inside drain, that's under the floor, to the outside. I want this to go separate to daylight, or in this case, go to the sump. I never want to invite this out here to go to my sump, although many times that's the only choice I have. But we talk about redundant drainage systems. So this, if I get water, it's been raining, this acts as a reservoir, and unless it's really a flood, this stores actually liquid water, but eventually it will drain out. And that's kind of how that works. But the earlier versions, 15 years, we had communications here. And what we found is that over time, we had more water coming this way. Overloading that, not good. So that's the kind of thinking that's gone in behind these details. You guys just holler at me if you see something that you're wondering about. On the web, you will see these details. And then these are all hot buttons. So if this thing says rigid insulation caulked at all edges, click on that, what exactly are you talking about? And sometimes even a detail that shows exactly how to caulk. So very, very handy. But notice a couple of things that are going on here. So this is interior insulation. You see there's isolation here. So this would be what we consider a thermal short. If this insulation wasn't here, I got heat that could go around that and right outside. But not the way this is done. I'm actually cutting small little blocks of insulation. So I've got true integrity. I've got consistent, continuous insulation. You have a continuous air layer or air barrier, and you also have it for insulation. Here's where things get a little bit confusing, but don't let me confuse you. You don't necessarily have to make them the same plane. One can be continuous insulation, and somewhere else could be your air barrier. But many times it does tend to be the same. A couple of things. If you know, in this dryability, you saw that arrow that went out this way. If this is going to get wet, what do I want to have? Latex paint. You go, oh, gee, I was going to go oil-based here because I don't want that water coming in. This is the kind of thinking that goes into this. No, 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 you want it to be latex because that's more permeable than your oil-based paints. This is a rigid insulation that's placed here, and it's placed here because that is going to, and yes, I could be doing 2x4s and setting it off, but that's not the detail here. That's available, but that's this. This is a continuous foam board, probably like in our area 2 inches.
What about using like dry lock? Put that on the outside or the inside?
Well, I sure would love it more on the outside than on the inside. Yes, it's done. And in many cases, it's working. It's enough to get it to work. But let's just say that I put the dry lock on, and I do have hollow cavities, and now I'm building up this moisture. You know, it's a potential solution, but I want to look at, you know, kind of the whole deal before I say, oh yeah, that's always it. And there's companies that are going to warranty your moisture system, and you know, there's nothing wrong with them if done correctly, and that's a way of solving that moisture problem before I then go in and do this. Here's your spray foam, and again, it's here. It's not to be done lightly, but here's your spray foam done first. Then you're kind of saying, well, I could just take a paint and be good enough, but then on the inside of that is my drywall and my framed up. You know, that I don't have to necessarily have insulation in that, but that's going to give me a good detail. Now, you will see discussions in the text on this. This tends to want to be closed cell. We had Mr. Wright here last Wednesday, local guy in the area that has a spraying rig. He does a couple of different types of foams, but the closed cell is not as permeable to moisture. So that is going to say, if this gets wet, I'm going to try not to let that come in. And that's the solution when I have this going here. So I'm not going to confuse things. There are places where you could conceivably use the open cell that allows moisture to more readily pass through, but for now, when you go to the detail on this, this is calling for closed cell. Uh, 8 inches minimum, so I don't want water splashing and getting up, and that's kind of, a lot of times that's code in areas when inspected for. Okay, here's my integrated moisture and radon mitigation system, and been retrofitted before. The arguments have always been, I don't know as if I would necessarily, on a new house, put this in, but I for sure would put that pipe in. Would I put that fan in? Probably not. This is done in Knoxville and inspected for and expected that this pipe be here. What they'll do is they'll stop it right there close to the ridge vent and make it an easy retrofit if indeed radon is an issue. So I'll cut it off here, I'll cut it off there. And actually I said cut it off. I believe that, and I'm quite certain, they do pull it into that gravel seam. And I know that, and I apologize for misspeaking, because what you're going to do is what's called sub-slab depressurization. If I did have a problem, I continue it up through the roof, and when the wind blows by, I'm going to get a little suction. If I have a modest radon problem, that's all I need. That takes care of it. But if I have a real problem, and that's usually when I don't want to mess with it, you're going to put a little inline fan, 24/7. That fan's going to run, and it's going to cause that house to be, that slab area to be depressurized. The radon's going to come this way, and then this is the path of least resistance, not through all the cracks. I see this all of the time. An open sump. Look in it, water. Look elsewhere, moisture, mold, mildew. Wide open to the basement is an open sump. Most of them are done like it. There might be a cover, but it's just so that the ball doesn't fall into it, the dog's bone or something like that. So it's never really an airtight seal, but needs to be. And then sucking out of it, usually there's communications, if it's done correctly, where that helps suck and cause that depressurization. Again, using your tax money as a Oak Ridge researcher, I opened up by saying I thought that inside insulation system was more risky and really would like to go outside. So I found these guys in Nashville, and they do what they call hydrovacking, which is, and they'll do this even around gas lines and high voltage lines around airports. Well, they'll trench by making a solution around the soil, sucking it out, putting it into this truck. It's now semi-hazardous waste, has to be dumped not just anywhere, but you generally have to have a lined landfill somewhere to bring that. But the hope was that we could do that right next to the outside of a house, and that would be, better than a backhoe and making a whole mess out of the whole yard and all the expensive landscaping. And I was going to do that with this house I showed earlier, and I was going to set up an experiment where this was going to be my exterior fiberglass system, and I was hoping to have those guys excavate it, and then now from a ditch, 1.5 feet deep, could I set a footer drain down there? Could I waterproof? Could I inspect my waterproofing? Could I slip my insulation down? And I'll do that all from not inside this trench, because the man's not going to be able to get down there, and I didn't want to do a big whole yard excavation. But that would be a way of getting it from the outside. So the key here is to see, if there's somebody close by, and this is not an industry that's geared up for doing this yet, but could be, and I really think there's an opportunity. I was going to compare that with an interior closed cell foam on the basement and an interior open cell. And this is what I had set up. This is, I just did small areas. I believe this is the closed cell, and that was on top of heat flow transducers that measure heat flow and temperatures, and I had little moisture probes that I was going to compare these side by side. And then you do plots to kind of show. This is the combo probe. So this measures both the relative humidity and temperature, and relative humidity on this curve. This is behind the closed cell. So these were the dates, a couple of dates in October, And what I found was that the temperature below grade on the outside was this temperature here. So this is October, down to about 62. And the interior temperature a little bit warmer. I have a whole series of these, and not just for a short period of time, but that was going to give me the insight to be able to compare these two. This was on the uninsulated, same time period, uninsulated, and you could see a lot more fluctuations on the temperature below grade on the inside, a little bit more stable like we observed on the outside. And relative humidity, pretty much 100%. That's on the inside of that brick masonry. Okay, so let's slip from basement to crawl space. And let me just ask, the house you live in, how many live in a house with a crawl space? Oh yeah, most of us. Yeah. All right, so this is a bit more relevant. Let me just open up by saying it's no different in a basement. You ought to treat your crawl space like it is a short basement. And when you do that, a whole different solution pops up, and that's kind of the belief here. So the idea of having open vented crawl spaces, not a good idea. How many have open vented crawl spaces? Everybody does. In fact, TVA, with their great leadership, doesn't know what to do either. The whole world, I just echoed, the building science community will tell you treating that crawl space as if it was a short basement is the answer. And the EPA, Energy Star, this is the answer. The HERS ratings, it'll give you better points for that. So, with that as a somewhat controversial start, that we don't have what we should have in the house that we live in, let me kind of show you some of the whys. Okay, you kind of see the same concept as what was shown before on the dryability, that this is 100% relative humidity, and it's always going to be driving moisture to the inside. And I need to be cognizant and aware of that. Same arguments I made earlier. This is almost exactly the same detail about not wanting to rot this puppy out, wanting to keep this open, so encourage that drying. However, there is an approach that a vented crawl space is blessed by this group of smart people that hammered on this, and a couple of things of import. A ground cover, not just throw it down there and get most of it. A lapped and sealed. A run up the wall above the soil, and don't just pookie it up. Take a 1x4 and hammer so that it stays there. So I truly have built a swimming pool. Not a bad idea, just in case I get a plumbing leak, or it does flood, and if I was in the wake of Isaac a couple weeks ago, it did flood. I don't want to have to pump that out. I don't want to have to dry. I would like to account for, ideally, again, to either a sump or to daylight, the lowest point in that crawl, want to drain. Now, very important, what is this? Nobody has this. This is foil-faced polyisocyanurate taped and sealed. I have done this. This is not in a closed crawl space. This is another dirty job of energy efficiency. I really think this would be a great show. It'd probably be watched by the same small percentage, but nevertheless, this is not an easy thing to do on a retrofit basis. You want to come in, and first of all, you kind of go, well, where's the crawl space hatch? Well, that means you're going to have to cut down, most likely, all your 4x8 foot sheets that this wants to be in into smaller sections. But it can be done. But why am I going through all this stuff? Because this is going to be now my air barrier right here. And it's going to protect my floor structure, and I'm going to isolate the thermal shorts, and we've made all sorts of measurements. When you have your floor joists down here, that's where we get moisture. And I'm going to show you a very rigorous study where we did exactly that. And so this is a solution. Not easy to execute, but that's acceptable then to have a vented crawl space. Well, let's see. What if we did something like this? And this is an unvented crawl space with interior insulation. It's designed to be termite resistant in heavily infested areas. Termite inspection gap. Okay, but most of the time I'm concerned about heat leaving this space. It's not going to go here, it's going to go right here. The house that I built in Oak Ridge, that we did a one-year study of the conventional crawl space versus this, I brought this right up to the top, but I took a piece of tape, cut this, so that whenever I wanted to visually inspect for my subterranean termites, I could just pull this flap and look in. But most of the time, it was serving me well as an insulated layer. I like that solution. Notice not just 6 mil, that plastic stuff that when you crawl on it, all little gravels come through and poke holes in it. This is a 20 mil and really wants to be fiber reinforced. Still like, for the same reason, my drain. Also notice 3-inch wicking gap. So I'm not going to bring this all the way down. Here's a long, tortuous path. Yeah, it's a thermal short, but it ain't much of one. Yeah, this one's more serious. Far superior doing it this way. It's a new construction detail. Can it be done in retrofit? If you're doing a major gut rehab, maybe, and even then it's going to be a challenge. But notice the beauty of this. I mean, this is what you want to strive for when you grow up, if you can with your house. Nice, continuous outside, no penetrations or very few. Got a good, maybe 1.5 inches at least, maybe 2 inches. Really protects the house. Low risk moisture problem, and a couple of things that could be done. They do make, for below grade, borate treated rigid foam. Helps a little bit. It's not going to guarantee it, but I have a whole story on the drainage, what they used to be called Warm and Dry. It's now sold by a company called Koch that sells fiberglass that will serve as a drainage and insulation board. Comes in about 2 3/16 thickness. Just the top, about 1/8, serves as a drainage. You've got to have a good drain tile here, but I have experimented with this, put it in the ground, come back 15 years later, no problem with termites. I have buried extruded polystyrene 15 years later, termites. So I really like this system, and the book, if I should ever write it, talks about what I really would like to do for my zero energy kit, and it is all about the rigid mineral wool. I really like that system. Gives me drainage, gives me protection of my waterproofing, but again, it is a new construction detail for the most part. "15 years ago, when we tried to say that this was something worth doing, that we were going to have a termite shield all the way around our house, that we could walk around and make sure and see, think about your house. Oh, there's the back porch. Oh, there's the front porch. Oh, there's a room added on. Very, very difficult to maintain this over the life of a house. But again, I just as soon try to shoot for something like this as opposed to leaving these things wide open. Radon control. again, the idea that I have this pipe that's going to be able to drain. It's good for moisture. It's good for radon. That I want to make sure that this is a true maintained barrier, because I'd like to be able to pull a pressure on this, and I can never do that if this is not tight. And what I'm putting in here is a layer of gravel, and this will give me that passage where, you know, radon can come and gather, but then hopefully be executed or evacuated from that space to the outside. The same detail we talked about before.
Does the 20 mil vapor barrier have any effect on the radon?
No, I would argue that at 6 mil, when it's fresh, when you haven't crawled all over it, when you lapped and sealed and protected it, it'll be fine. The 20 mils is a durability. It's going to last longer. The permeability of radon through the 6 mil isn't going to be much different than it is with this. So the answer is no. But we've all seen enough 6 mil. It just doesn't last. There are simple things to do. You know, when you have something like an HVAC unit that's down there, or a water heater, or whatever, or where the charcoal grill goes, or the kid's bike, or whatever you have, you know, carpet remnants are not a bad thing to have, just like they do in roofing, where those commonly passages are protected in some manner. But 6 mil ain't going to hold up on top of gravel with any kind of pressure. It's going to have all these pinholes, and then you've gone through this elaborate system. So the idea, there is a company called YourCrawlspaces.com. Comes out of North Carolina. They have a really nice system. They have a kit, and most importantly, you know, when you use the adhesives, many of these adhesives are very volatile, and there's been stories of these guys putting these in, smoking, and actually having an explosion. They have a membrane that is low, non-explosive adhesive that even if you're smoking next to it isn't going to combust. And it's been kind of designed, if you will, for this particular wall system. The way this gets put in is and your columns go first. And then this gets put underneath, and then this membrane comes over the top of that. So you're not actually one piece trying to fold and keep the integrity of this. You're actually doing these first and your pillars, and then you're coming with this last.
If you put the 20 mil down, do you need the foam board against the blocks on a retrofit?
Well, you know, you can do either. I mean, but you know, if I'm only thinking radon, then that's sufficient. But if I'm talking about the and then, you know, if I've got vented or whatever, that has to be taken care of. But the foam board, is it necessary to protect that? No, not necessarily. You know, but that barrier does multiple things. It keeps the radon, keeps the moisture, allows me to more safely put insulation on that inside, which I know behind that is going to be condensation. I know that. And the idea of isolating it and then being able to vent, you know, it's just, you know, it helps indoor air quality, helps a variety of different things. These are a series, again, all kind of on the outside of unvented Cadillac systems for crawl spaces, and we already talked about the difficulty of getting them, but they're all in this handbook. Here is the same kind of detailing for a crawl space that I showed for the basement. You know, you got a little bit different treatment. You don't have a necessarily poured foundation here, but that's the only variation from the basement detail that I showed you earlier. you know, another important thing just to note, when typically when this footer is put in this part of the country, the way it's done is a 1.5-foot bucket digs this trench 8 inches. There's no forms. It's just then poured. And then you're going to say, well, wait a second. I thought this was supposed to, how do I get that in there? Well, many times if you did care about it and didn't catch this, now I got to go excavate next to it to get this in. And this does not want to be up here. This wants to be below the top of that footer because I don't want to put pressure on that crack that's going to be there. So that's got to be a formed footer. And that generally means a few dollars when it comes to installing that footer. And then another thing that is, I will not call this controversial any longer, but had been, is I have a hygroscopic break right here. And you kind of say, well, wait a second. I want a bond. I want this to bond to that. And you're going to do what? You're going to put a piece of plastic so that it won't actually bond? Unacceptable. Well, you're going to put a rebar in here, and whether you put block or pour, that's still going to occur. But there's a whole variety of different types of spray-on, paint-on, generally look like tar or bitumen, that will serve as that hygroscopic break. But the argument is, today, if you can get at it, you get at it. When you have retrofit, you most likely don't have that break, and moisture is being wicked up like this. Here's the crawl space with the spray foam. This is getting to be pretty common. Pretty common. Now, I'm not framing out here, but many times, most important, I need a fire-resistant coating. There are some of these foams that are ASTM E84 certified. One day I look, oh yeah, they all are. The next day, oh no, they're not. Generally, the more cost-effective applications, they are not. And then you can pay the same guy that puts this in to come over with a sprayer and hit this with a paint that gives you your E84 coating. And however, it's something that can be done pretty easily by yourself. This, not so. This is a rig that's expensive. But when I was talking to Mr. Wright here last week, he's got this $40,000 rig, and he says, right now, the market has fallen out for the supply side, which means you can get this in cheaply now. Many times these guys have these rigs, they're in the commercial buildings, but the competition on this, so the price has come enormously down. And this, when you just look at it in a crawl space, pretty slick solution. But again, just so you know what you're doing, if I do this and I don't have that break right here, many times it's just 15-pound felt. You be the judge, but that might be good enough. I really would like to see a little bit more there. But for sure, if I don't see a hygroscopic break right here, either walk or jack your house. and because that's that important. I wouldn't do this if I'm going to now rot out the wall. And this, long discussions on this, and some of my geeky building science friends have actually tried to take this and lift the house up, or brace it and knock this out if it's a top block. Now we're into pretty serious surgery. Just a couple of shots on a good old slab, how to treat that. Down and maybe out. What this has done, particularly up north, not so much here, but the argument in the north was you might as well go down 8 foot because you got to get 4.5 feet for frost. Well, this now opens up slabs to the north. And the way it's done, and this was heavily developed in the Scandinavian countries, is you only go down. And as I said earlier, slabs are cheap. Man, I can throw in a slab a lot cheaper than a crawl space or a basement. So this is a first cost, lower option, and doesn't force you to go so deep because the frost will follow this. it won't get under here and push your foundation up and cause cracks where you don't want them. This is an experiment. Schad in Knoxville built 4 research houses for us. They went and got $2 million and built these 4 research houses so that they could put the sign on the front of their business that said, "We're not greenwashers. We spent a lot of money with the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, built them 4 sandboxes to play games in and make measurements and learn very, very important stuff and come tell you without the noise of various occupants." The same kind of robotic control that I had invented for the Campbell Creek houses went into these homes. We're not in spec-built, $200,000 houses. These are, many of you know the price better than I, but my guess is these are 400 or 350. They're 3,200 square feet, or 3,000 square feet. Very, very, very nice houses. Identical in inside volume, a little bit different architectural treatments, but insignificant as far as the overall energy performance of these houses. So what we would do, and there's a lot of different things going on, but in one case we had a unvented, like many of the details I showed you, crawl space, and then a vented. Made many, many measurements, modeled it, all blah, blah, blah. What's the real story? Which is best? So this is a little sketch of the floor area, or the crawl space floor area. And in here, I don't think I need to go through all the details, but we had purple our heat flow. So it actually measures the BTUs of heat that goes through at different points, temperatures, and the reds are moisture sensors. So we had those sprinkled on the walls, in the floor, in identical locations, in a unvented and a vented crawl space. So a very, very, this is kind of a building sciences dream to have this definitive experiment to set up. And like I say, upstairs, same temperature, same refrigerator doors opening, identically the same. So it's a real life, best you can get, definitive kind of, potentially definitive study of which is the best to do. Now remember, I opened this up by saying TVA is still confused as far as their in fact, they, as far as what recommendations are officially there. But this should be powerful enough to change that to say whatever the answer is, and I'll withhold that for a moment. Okay, so here's your, my guess is this is how your crawl space is treated, if it's treated at all. You got it, and you probably don't have 2 bats, you probably only have 1 that's pushed up. Well, we did that, and we put a heat flow and temperatures and moisture probes in there. And then we did the same thing in the unvented, but of course there's no insulation. The insulation is in the walls on this one. So we had actually 1-minute data. I mean, more numbers than you could, ever thought you'd ever want to look at, and we don't. We, have computers that add, subtract, multiply, and we summarize, but we've got it if we need it. And sometimes we do need it. This is 4, which is the unvented. And there's a little schematic of what we're actually seeing here. So we have the subfloor is this purple, and we're looking at it for summer months. So we have the temperature, this is only heat flow. This is in BTUs per hour per foot squared. So how much heat is coming in or out. So at that living room, dining, and these are 2, one's in the bedroom, it's floating around here at pretty close to 0, a little bit above. For the, this is 3 has the insulation in it. Okay, that was the one that I showed you. That 3 is the one with, 4 is the one that has no insulation. So 4 being these two, you see actually more heat leaving that space, which is a good thing in the summer, right? I want to see cooling. So it's showing me a benefit that I have more heat leaving my house where I want to be comfortable when I don't have that floor insulated. This is how we set up the wall for our experiment. This is how, for the vented, for the unvented, here's how we set up our sensors. So you guys are probably less interested in all of that, but I just want to prove that we're not just winging it. Here is the sensors. They're buried in this little piece of water-resistant drywall. We take them to our laboratory hot plates. We make a known heat flow. We look at the little correction factor on them and customize it so it picks up exactly when we take this thing and put it in the field that we know the amount of heat that's coming in and going out. And so when we look at the walls, we've got the, this is the W3 is the vented. The heat flow on the north, and when it's positive, it's to the inside. When it's negative, it's to the outside. So the blue is slightly negative. We are losing heat in W3 on the north up and north down. So this is down. This is in the dirt, the red. So there is actually a reversal here. We have heat coming in for that part above the ground. This heat's coming. I don't want heat coming in. Wait a second. But I do. I'm in December now. I'm in the heating season. So I have heat coming in to that crawl space in December. I have it going out below grade in the one that didn't have any insulation. This is a little more than I was kind of probably should be trying to go through with you guys. Now, here it is with that same wall, but with insulation on it. So now I have got heat being lost in December, both above and below. So I've got heat going to the outside when I have that wall insulated.
I think the big thing there is that you're not, before you were higher number above the line.
Whether you're above the 0 line or not, is that what you're saying?
0 line, yeah. Before you had bigger numbers.
Yeah. So everything, when it's showing up here, is heat coming in. Everything out here is heat going out. Yeah, okay, thanks. That's a good way to point that out. So here's a picture of what these look like. This is just throw it in. Don't tape it. This is what I will argue kind of gets done, but this was probably done a little bit better than typical. But there's your vented crawl space. And then for your unvented, coming up these pillars, sealing it, 20 mil, lapped, very, very carefully. What happens here is on these, and here, is I've got colder temperatures. In fact, I measured right there that 80% of the relative humidity at the bottom of those floor trusses in the vented crawl grows mold. Unvented insulated crawl has 0 mold growing after the first year of measured data. So in this, no mold, here, mold. I'm just going to leave this that we got temperature going here, and what we found is that the floor relative humidity is high, and when I say dangerously high, conditions conducive to mold and mildew growing. Not so much, a little bit cooler in the unvented crawl space. Year-round, August through July 10 through July 11, when we looked at the relative humidity, we found that, and generally you want to stay always below like 70%. Less conducive environments for growing mold and mildew. So now we did something really interesting to me, was we modeled, and our good friends in Scandinavia have invented something called the mold index. And it's a combination of things, but it for sure has relative humidity in it, moisture, and the substrate, and is, it's going to be different on masonry than it's going to be on wood. But what we found with the vented is that, and then we took all our data, our moisture sensors, our temperatures, and we plugged it into this model. And in essence, the model predicted the biological growth of mold and mildew. And what we found is that we started here, but within a very short time, we surpassed the magic 2. And it's kind of like you stay under 2, no mold. You go above, mold. You go way above, a lot of mold. So this is your vented. Right, when I'm looking up in my crawl space, right at that 2 by 10 or whatever, 2 by 12, 2 by 8, that's the point where that was occurring. When we took the sealed, was 0, remains 0. Again, it's kind of, this is scientists, physicists, researchers trying to boil down complicated little plots to things that we all can immediately look at and understand, is in essence that attempt here. So I said, okay, let's go take a picture, because surely we're going to see no new mold in one and mold in the other. And so I did. So this is, and I don't know how well you can see this, but there's a little bit more black. I was expecting a lot more than this, to tell you the truth, compared to here. And this did not have no staining, but that brings up an important point. When this was constructed, the unvented, it's opened up to the rain, and it got rained on. And then before we kind of get our whole conditioning system in, and we put a small little supply pipe down there, so it does have some dehumidification as part of the solution of this. But during the construction period, that's not there. And so we had serious mold when we first closed it in both of these crawl spaces. Just something to keep in mind, or new construction, that has to be dealt with. And by the way, that's important. That little drain that I showed before, that's a nice thing to have, because during construction it's going to get wet, and I don't want to have to pump that water out if I've got this. You really want to come in after it's sealed up to put that final membrane in. And then you want to just throw plastic down temporarily so your workers aren't walking on mud and then going on your floor. I think I'm going to jump on this, but this was really interesting to us as far as as I indicated, we are providing a supply duct down there, and I thought the solution needed to be that we should do that at least during the summertime, not necessarily the winter. And what I surprised myself and found out was that supply duct was actually contributing moisture throughout the summer and therefore sealed it off. and so this is a case of, it wasn't that's what I was expecting to find, but when I discovered that and sealed it off, I actually got an improvement in my behavior of humidity down there.
Wait, so you don't want, in the conditioned crawl space, you don't want higher than that?
I'm going to put it in. I'm going to put in an.
I thought there's one required there for.
Oh, you, okay, wait. Okay. the vents that are around, generally code requires that you put one in every corner, as you indicate. But I'm going to seal those up. I'm going to put foam in there and seal those up. They're not going to be there. What about the code guy? Okay, this kind of data is going to have to be shown, and I indicate TVA that this is a basement. It's not a crawl space. It is a short basement. Do you require vents in basements? No. There's actually language that.
Don't you have dead air, and then you got built-in mold. You got dead air. Even in a basement.
If you vent to a basement.
Oh, you got it sealed up. Now, if it's sealed up, you still got to have air down there, or you got dead air. Dead air, you got moisture.
Okay, well, I'm glad you're kind of feeding back to me here, because the whole premise of this is that in the summertime, with that vent open, I'm bringing in outside air into a cold place that does not have the capacity to retain the moisture. The warmer the air, the more the capacity to hold moisture. When I bring it into that crawl space, it hits dew point. Dew point means that warm, moist air that's in my crawl space now condensed. If I don't have a ground cover, that moisture comes up from the ground, condenses. I want to block that moisture source from the ground. I want to block no vents to the outside, because all summer I am causing the mold and mildew from the outside with a traditional vented crawl space. What this research is doing is saying,
You're misunderstanding what I'm saying about vent. We drop an air vent from the heat and air under the floor.
okay, yeah, okay,
We seal it in the bottom.
good.
Foam up on the wall.
Oh, good.
No vent.
I'm now with you.
And then we lap the plastic up, we seal it with foam, we seal around the perimeter.
Okay, now I'm getting you. Okay,
We have to drop a register, one for every 1,200 square foot.
one for every what?
1,200.
Okay, I'm going to tell you, that was done here too. And I jumped over the slide, but it means a lot to you. Because I was trying to, and actually, so I had a supply in there with an America Aldi's baffle on it, which is a balloon that allowed no backdrafting. Do you do that? Okay, perfect. But I also had a manual damper. Okay, but what I'm saying to you is that when I did that, I was actually bringing moisture from the house into that crawl space. And the reason is that the way the unit worked, I was bringing my fresh air into that unit, and the unit was operating, just circulating for fresh air many, many times, and that air up there wasn't being conditioned. It was just being circulated. And then when it would get put into the crawl space, when I looked at the grains of moisture, it was actually adding. So I was following, in fact, there's a wonderful guideline, and it sounds like you're following that, from North Carolina, that crawlspaces.org. That is the proper way, and that's what I had intended to do. But my surprise with this plot is that I was actually contributing moisture. So my solution was I put a dehumidifier down there, set that dehumidifier at 70%, not at 30, not at, I'm elated with 50 in my house. 65 is fine in a crawl space. And if it was a good dehumidifier, that thing will never run if its sensors are right and if I've got a good seal. So the backup here was to have a dehumidifier with a good trigger. Many of these dehumidifiers, they go on just to see what's going on, and as a result, run all the time. A dehumidifier in a very efficient house eats you alive as far as the amount of energy it requires. So, yeah, I go ahead and put it in. But what I really want to do is cut it off and put that dehumidifier, let that dehumidifier run as little as it has to. If I really do see a problem, actually what I'd like to try to do is not have that dehumidifier, with the hope that that unit would be properly sized and wouldn't be dumping humidity in it. But I guess what I'm telling you is that, yeah, I concur that you have to put it in, but what my measurements are saying is I didn't. If I had that dehumidifier down there, that would have been good enough.
From a builder's point though, I could put the dehumidifier in just and I can have a towel.
Yeah, either way, I'm going to have that dehumidifier. Absolutely, I'm going to have that dehumidifier. Well, you're doing the right thing. I mean, but my guess is you're having to educate a lot of people.
The inspectors. Our building inspectors, they're not on the same page.
No, and by the way, I have had up in Knoxville, I've paid these guys to come and hear BPI's, kind of instruction, 1 week instruction, and the head there came and participated, and it's a hard haul. And these guys, what they generally do, and I don't know if this will work here. I always have this theory about people that become policemen and inspectors. They have some other things on their agenda that they want to do. I love these guys. I mean, they do try. But what I've found works is having them call areas, say up in Knoxville. Hey, they're letting them do it in Knoxville. Why don't you call up there? And oh, and somebody else knows more than they? Well, I don't. I thought I appreciate this, and I'm sure we both have war stories. When I do some of these things, and I knew I was opposed to the codes, I'd bring these guys in for education, and I was so proud of myself that, they were fighting the venting behind the bricks, and so I made that part of my experiment. I measured vent, no vent, and he was just so I've tried that one day with solar. I've tried to bring these guys in, and
I had a battle with them.
yeah.
You don't have anything? You guys got anything? No, you don't need anything.
Yeah. Well, you can kind of see from this discussion it's evolving, but this electronic handbook, and if you somehow could portray the intelligence behind this, it's not people's opinions. I mean, this is pretty heavy, and I'm one person at the table with a couple of really good studies, and there's another 20 that kind of the best, if you will, that was available, including builders. A lot of good builders were in the room. And this is about as good a consensus as it gets on treatment of crawl spaces. And it's not just for the north. It's climate specific. So, well, that's pretty darn close to the end of my tale here, and I know we're getting hungry for lunch. And so I will stop with that. There is lunch provided. We'll break a little bit here, and as soon as you guys are willing to start, the next one is what energy solutions are blowing in the wind. I will tell you, this is not a big wind area. You guys are not getting demands to put up wind in your area.